Good morning. So, um, my particular expertise, for those of you who are new to Gebser or new to me, is I am a scholar of terrorism. You remember that? And so I tend to live in very dark places. And when students come to me to say, I want to do my master's degree in terrorism, I say, if you do, you have to have a second area, and it has to be something light and fun. Because you got to have puppies and rainbows in your life if you do this. And so today I'm not going to talk about terrorism per se, but I'm going to talk about something that's equally dark. And so my paper this year is called Social Place, False Nostalgia, and Revolutionary Integrality. So I realize that some of you in this room are new to Gebser, and so I'm going to try to throw in a little Gebser 101 to bring you up to speed. And I ask your indulgence if you already know this stuff. I agree with what Debashish said last night, that we are still trying to reconcile as a species the horrific nature of the Second World War. That we can talk about when did we can argue about when did modernism begin. But for many people, there's no question about when modernism ended, and that was with the dual events of the revelations of Auschwitz and of Hiroshima. That the modernist project led us to these two things that would have been impossible without modernism. And so we are shaped by that. I agree with him. I would add to that we are further shaped by the end of the Cold War, which has influenced every human around the world in ways that they are conscious of and in ways that they are unconscious of. And we are shaped also by the end of the Cold War, which reorganized our world and had profound effects on the way that we see that world, because we had been so shaped by that Cold War world. And in fact, so much so that when the Cold War ended, Francis Fukuyama famously proclaimed it the end of history, which obviously it wasn't, and that's not really what he meant. But he was trying to make a point that so much of our world's organization was based around that Cold War, that now that it's over, what do we do? And we talked about going from the bipolar world to which is, I mean, all jokes aside about the bipolar world, we went from the bipolar world to the unipolar world, where, there was the last man standing was the United States. And now we're moving into a more fragmented world, and we're, a BRICS world. And maybe if it's a multipolar world, or maybe it's a non-polar world at all. What we're experiencing now, though, are interrelated existential crises. And this is not an exhaustive list, but if you're not feeling down already, I'm going to bring you down. That this idea that the world had organization, and some people sort of become nostalgic for the Cold War, because even though we were on the brink of mutual assured destruction and annihilation, there was a structure to the world. On this side of the Iron Curtain, we knew that we were the good guys and they were the bad guys, and we were trying to fix the world by spreading our way to it. And on the other side of the Iron Curtain, they knew that they were the good guys and we were the bad guys, and they were trying to fix the world by spreading their way of life to it. And and there was a sense of that. And, the USA and the USSR played Risk, but with real countries. But we don't have that structure anymore. And there's both good and bad to that. we're now living in, and I heard Debussy say this and other speakers say this, in this world of hyper-capitalism. We are at ground zero for hyper-capitalism here in San Francisco, where we have just a block from here, Twitter. I'm still calling it Twitter. You know, owned by the world's richest man who bought it as a vanity project and lost $40 billion, and it doesn't even feel that. And we have people sleeping and defecating on the sidewalk, right in front. That's hypercapitalism. Another catastrophe, another apocalypse means unveiling, but another problem that we're living through, crisis, is the climate catastrophe. And we're watching it unfold. And, you know, every prediction that climatologists have made has been exceeded in its catastrophic nature. We're not on track the way the climatologists told us we were. We're doing worse. Along with that, interrelated, is the displacement of people, which will only get worse, right? I mean, the Earth will survive the climate crisis. Whether the things that live on the Earth will survive is a different question. But people will be displaced. If the Himalayas don't have a snowpack, all of the people downstream will have to move because there won't be a stream. We see that places in the United States are now no longer insurable because the insurance industry, which is, nobody would accuse it of being anything but conservative, understands the impact of climate change, even if the rhetoric of the insurance company doesn't acknowledge the climate catastrophe. You can't get homeowners insurance in large parts of California or most of Florida. I think maybe now all of Florida because of that. And that goes along with the displacement, and we'll see it domestically just as we are seeing it internationally. Another one is the rise of nationalisms. And I'm going to talk about that. And with the rise of nationalisms comes the resurgence of old prejudices, retreads of old prejudices. We're not really, we haven't invented new prejudices, so to speak. We're just bringing the old ones out. Ones that we thought we had moved beyond reappear. That happens largely through populist politics, which has taken hold in the United States, India, Turkey, Italy. I mean, the list is long. Brazil, the Philippines, Russia. And along with the populism, the sort of the matrix for that, the mechanism they use is scapegoating and the nostalgia that I'm about to talk about. And then I want to refresh the memories of people who have been to these conferences about a theory that I have created and presented here, which is the blindness of the cure. The blindness of the cure is my own theory that says the longer the time that elapses from the debut of a solution to a problem, the more likely people are to forget about the original problem and reframe the solution as a problem. So for example, and this will tie into this talk today, feminism was the solution to a problem. Feminism was the solution to a problem. Violence against women, disempowerment of women, the silencing of women, the denial of fundamental rights to women, from everything from opening a bank account to filing for a divorce. Feminism was the solution to a problem. But today, feminism is talked about as the problem. as though there was no reason for feminism to come along to at all. And there's lots of other examples. Vaccines, Zionism. There are lots of them that we can come up with that were the solution to terrible problems. But by forgetting about the problem, we can ignore its ever existence, which I will argue today is a deliberate act. So a little bit of Gebser. So you've heard these terms, the consciousness structures. Gebser argued basically on a meta level. He's not talking about individuals, so we can't say that I have an integral consciousness. Gebser's talking about the species. And he's talking about the fact that what looks like an evolutionary pattern, that we go from archaic consciousness to magic consciousness, to mythic consciousness, to mental rational consciousness, and eventually, hopefully, to integral consciousness, is not an evolutionary thing. It's an additive thing, that the prior structures of our consciousness remain in us. So, for example, I wear this magic ring, and I got this magic ring because I stood in front of a person in a silly costume and said some magic words, and now she owns half my shit. Right? Marriage is a mental rational act. It's a social contract that has to do with business arrangements and visitation in hospitals. But the way that you get there is to go through a magic act. And then you get to wear a magic ring. But the magic is still there. It undergirds, it remains part of who we are. Now, hopefully you got that. If you're new to this, hopefully you got that. What Gebser also said is there's an efficient mode and a deficient mode in each. And so think of it like cylinders in a car. If one of your spark plugs isn't working, the car misfires. It'll still go. It'll just be clunky. It'll make noise, it'll shimmer, it'll shake, but you'll still get there. That cylinder is in a deficient mode. Maybe it's only firing every so often instead of every time. It's not a perfect analogy, but I didn't get much sleep last night. The deficient mode causes us to overemphasize some part of our consciousness to the detriment of the whole of our consciousness. So we don't see what we should, or we only see part of what we should. It's bad. We're not fully operational. Now, Gebser himself, of course, as a German-born person who saw the horror of the Nazi Party and left, talked about what he called the deficient magic of Nazis. So, they had these great uniforms and parties and the flags and the banners and everything. And on the surface, it was seductive and it looked great, but he said it was playing on terrible ideas. The idea that being German is a matter of blood rather than citizenship, that we can exclude entire swaths of society because they don't have the right blood. Blood is idolic magic in Gebser terms. When we focus on blood, it's magic and it's deficient magic. That's an important thing to understand. I can't go into why right now because I only have a short time today, but that's kind of a thing that's been established in our literature, Gebser literature. Now, what we see in these interlocking crises and this populism, this populist politics around the world is a lot of talk about place, not physical place, not location, but social place, one's place in society. And that idea of place imposes a particular kind of hierarchy on a population. Typically, that hierarchy, in the cases that I'm going to discuss today, doesn't exist if it ever did. And that's going to be important. That hierarchy, and I don't like absolutes, but I'm about to use one. That hierarchy that these politicians are putting out there is always categorical, it's always essentialized, and it's always rigid. In other words, when these politicians talk, there's no gray area. Roma are this, Jews are that, women are this, LGBTQ are that. There's no middle ground. The conversation that these politicians are having asserts place in order to subjugate some for the purpose of elevating others in order to save society. That's a common theme, that I'm saving society. And that social place is presented as natural. So the politician isn't asking gay people to endure some kind of hardship by going into the closet. The politician is just trying to preserve what's natural. And they, of course, are not. So there are familiar targets. So I'm going to just go through some. Orban in Hungary, his familiar targets are the Roma. We used to call them gypsies, right? LGBTQ people, the West, just the West. I don't like that direction. Women, non-Christians, in the case of Orban's rhetoric, it's mostly Jews and Muslims. Immigrants and people of mixed race. That's who Orban goes after in Hungary. In Turkey, Erdogan goes after women and Jews. Duterte, the former leader of the Philippines, went after women. Putin in Russia, his main targets have been the LGBTQ community and women, but recently he added Jews to the repertoire. Modi in India, women, non-Hindus, and in particular, the target is protesters. Bolsonaro, the former leader of Brazil, his main targets were the indigenous, LGBTQ people, and women. And Trump, well, how much time have you got? But his main targets were women and Muslims, and kind of his secondary wink, wink, nudge, nudge target was Jews, the wrong kind of Jews. What you see, however, the most common thing is misogyny. Every one of these people I mentioned targets women. Not only women, but women. So let's talk just about that because it's such a complex thing. The idea that permeates across all of these is that it is natural for women to be in a lesser role. And so the way that we do this is we create a false nostalgia. We yearn for a past that never was. So let me tell you what that looks like. Historical revisionism is very good. It's very good for this because if you can rewrite the past, then you get whatever kind of past that you want to sell to people. So let me tell you their revised past. Historical revisionism remembers an India in which everyone was Hindu and women used their bodies and voices only to raise children and support men. A Hungary in which only Hungarians ever slept, a Russia in which women were always homemakers, a Turkey in which the Hagia Sophia was only ever a mosque. A USA that was built, run, and populated exclusively by cisgendered Christian white men whose wives left the house only to attend church. And an entire world without gay people, trans people, Jews, or women who think and speak. That's what you get. And I've been collecting these. These are all, if I can get them out here, these folders here that I can't reach are filled with just quotes from these folks. Scrapbooking. And that's what you get. That's the world that they've created. Okay, so because I want to finish early to give Daniel a little extra time, let me try to wrap this up. So what we have is we have this world in which we have mechanisms to rewrite history, including the blindness of the cure. We have all of these interlocking crises that lead to a populist kind of politics, and that populist kind of politics sells a phony nostalgia in order to get people to stop making trouble. And that's really the heart of why women are the target in so many of these scenarios. Because women are saying, we reject the place that you're trying to put us in. Russia's a great example. I'm no lover of the Soviet Union, but the Soviet Union was a much better place for women than Russia currently is. It was a much safer place for women than Russia currently is. We can say a lot about Soviet leaders. It's hard to find a bunch of rape jokes that they made. It's easy to find rape jokes that Putin has made, or Duterte, or Erdogan, or Modi, and the list goes on, or Trump. The list goes on and on. So why am I talking about this at a Gebser conference? Because what this is deficient consciousness. First of all, rewriting history in such an obvious, self-serving way is deficient mental rational, but it is also deficient mythical, because it's creating different country myths, different people myths. And it's frequently, because it's so tinged with racism in so many cases, it's deficient magic as well. So what is the response to this? In my last 3 minutes, I'm going to say this. The response to this is what I call an act of radical integrality. In this case, radical integrality is truth-telling. It's saying, no, that story is bullshit. That's not what happened. And we find ourselves having to do that a lot. Because it's not that there are multiple narratives and, it's that there are people who are deliberately lying to us. It's not an issue of well, agree to disagree. If people are deliberately lying, they're deliberately obfuscating, our responsibility is to stand up and tell the truth. And we see that in places like Florida, USA, now they're just banning the textbooks because they don't want children to be taught the truth. So telling the truth is a radical revolutionary act in 2023. But it's also an integral act, because the truth that we're telling is a truth about what it is to be human. I'm not a woman, and that's exactly why I need to stand against misogyny. I'm not gay. That's exactly why I need to stand as an ally of LGBT people. Because if not me, then who? And so I think that what's before us in the midst of this crisis, these crises are so big. What can I do about climate change? I mean, the US military pollutes more in a single day than every car in America belches out in a year. What can I do? What can I do? I can't do anything. And that's why these crises never get resolved, because I can't do anything on my level, but I can engage in daily acts of revolutionary integrality by simply telling the truth, stopping the joke, saying to people, man, that's not cool. That's what we need to do. And that's what we can do. And I thank you for your time.